It's day 5 of This Much Is True. My personal podcast for about 90 days to see how it rolls or whether it doesn't or not. Why do I keep forgetting my glasses? These things are like really cheap. It's my proper glasses are somewhere in the house. These are like something Himmler would wear. Oh, no, the thought of it. How are you? How is it going? Are you having a superb Saturday? In whatever corner of the world we find you, I certainly hope so. Before I go any further, can I remind you of some of the topics I touched on and got absolutely no reaction to? But still out there, I'm with my little panhandle and I'm saying, look, I really need some feedback here because I can incorporate you into the show and we can make it a living thing. Something really multicolored and beautiful, folks. So some of the subjects we touched on in these 5 days were statins. Your thoughts on statins, good or bad. Closer to home, safety in your city, but in Dublin City in particular. So any Irish folks out there listening? Social media, the ills of same. I mean, it is pretty detrimental when it reaches a certain obsession or addiction in your life. Parenthood, just a little reflection on that from you, good, bad, indifferent. And wills and trusts. In other words, where there's a will, there's a fight. Have you any juicy stories as to the fallout from an intestate situation or a will that was badly written or falling out with your siblings over the same thing? So they're just some of the things. Again, comments here on YouTube, or alternatively, please delight me. In fact, if you do, I will honour you with this. The first person to use my email and just comments in general, the email is thismuchistrue@protonmail.com. thismuchistrue@protonmail.com. The subjects I thought we'd cover this evening are as follows. The most influential book, perhaps, you've ever written. Can you please share? Did I just say written? I mean read. Also, what do you think the most important sense is? So we've got taste, we've got touch, we've got hearing, we've got sight. You know, what is it? What do you think is the real one? And finally, just a reflection on God rest his soul, davidsoul. Remember him? Hutch out of Starsky and Hutch. But before I get there, just a little bit about flight safety, because I saw that there had been a situation over, was it Canada or the States, an Alaskan flight, where not quite the door, but a panel and a window blew out, and a kid was nearly sucked out, and he literally did lose his shirt. I shouldn't be laughing, but his diligent mummy held well on tight to her precious boy. So thank God all 177 passengers after an emergency landing are safe. My brother, the handsome one, I have 2 brothers. One unfortunately passed away, Jerry, but the other one, Niall, is retired to a very nice corner of the world with his partner, and he loves it. But he, for I'd say about 40 years, he was a pilot, and he flew for a lot of the big airlines, and he'd started out in the Irish Air Corps here, flying the government jet. He had some good stories about that, I can tell you. And also kind of the air sea rescue thing. I know he was an observer. He flew over the big Fastnet disaster, it was known as, in the late 70s, I think. A lot of people lost their lives there. It was a yacht race gone wrong in this neck of the woods. But he ended up being a captain of probably the biggest airplanes in the world, which are the A380s, I think. Airbus. And I was having a chat with him one time, and I have another story from him, but you know what I'm like. I go off and so I'll just stick with what he said to me. In relation to safety, it was kind of good and it was kind of, well, I'm not going to say anything. But he said to me, it had gotten so computerized that a lot of time was spent, you know, the way we all have an idea that, you can just sit back and put it on autopilot and you can do nothing. But computers are communicating with the pilot and co-pilot all the time, especially on these larger new aircraft. And he said to me they were on a long-haul flight one time. And the nightmare kind of scenario is when the computer forwards you an error and you've got to kind of look up, sometimes even in just a big, thick handheld manual, or probably through computer as well, but you've got to look up the solution. But the worst situation is when that happens and you've solved one problem and there's what's known as, have you ever seen when you use your own PC, you know, the way it continues sometimes to cascade messages at you, you close one and another one opens, etc., etc. That can happen. And it can be frustrating, time-consuming, and borderline, detriment to safety. They said they were on this flight one time, and one message after another. Then, and I think there are 8 different batteries on this huge plane. One battery failed. Nothing big there. An hour or two, another battery failed. Wow, is there something going on? It got, I think, to 4, 5, 6 out of the 8 all over time, and they're kind of looking at each other. And what had happened was, because these aircraft are hugely luxurious now with their own, their own kind of little compartments and even showers, somebody had taken a shower and had been a bit overzealous or sleepy. And this thing had made its way through the wiring of the aircraft and put it in extreme danger. So he retired there about 6, 7 years ago, and he said he doesn't miss flying at all. He said it was taking its toll on him because, as you know, speaking of safety, these guys are put through rigorous health tests every year, and if you fail your medical, doesn't matter how much experience or thousands of hours of flight you have, you're potentially out. So he just said to me, I've done my time with aircraft. Now, let's just talk about the most influential book that you have ever read. Now, some of you are going to say the Quran and the Bible and all that, but I'm talking about, the normal author and you read it situation. What was it? I have a few favourites. But I have to tell you, I think the most influential at a certain age I ever read, and I probably was still in my teens or late teens at the time, was a book by the late Dr. Waynedyer. Do you remember him? Especially in the States, he made a big splash in the mid-1970s, 75 to be precise, with a book, which for me was a life-changing book, called Your Erroneous Zones. Your Erroneous Zones. And check it out. And in fact, I'll put a link in at the bottom of this where you can hear quite a lot of it on audio, on YouTube. And he was quite the guy. And erroneous, i.e. like an error, it's the errors we make in perceiving how we handle life, essentially. And he boiled it down to this golden piece of advice. Whatever you're going through generally has been your choice. Now, I'm not talking about, you're born into whatever situation. Of course, that can happen. But the stuff that kind of goes wrong throughout your life, generally you, at some point, you are the sum of the choices you've made. And if you go into the link I'll show you, he basically highlights quite a lot of points. You could call them bulletin points, if you like, which are generally in common to most people. And it would be things like holding on to the past. Everything was better in the past. What can you do about that? Then there was like, people are so self-critical and they would take certain aspects of themselves, be it facially or body type, whatever, and ruminate on these things also, at times people would be looking for justice. And he said, sometimes my patients come in here, or my clients, and they say to me, it was my mother's fault, or it's God's fault. My mother and father wouldn't let me ride a bicycle when I was young. So they would take these kind of hang-ups right throughout their lives with them as an excuse, if you like. In fact, he wrote another book called, I'm looking around for it here, called Excuses Be Gone, which is quite good. So he said, well, do you know what I do sometimes? I say, hey, there's a bicycle outside there, just outside the building. Here's the key to the lock. Go outside and ride around on that bicycle. See how you get on. So people would kind of go, they'd see the kind of the error of their ways, their erroneous zones, kind of how stupid it was to be holding onto something like that. There's quite a few of them. They just don't come to my mind at the moment. But please follow the link. It's a really, and it's read by him. It's really enjoyable. Now, as his career went on, he got a bit too esoteric for me. He joined up with the likes of Deepak Chopra, who used to be on Oprah. And it just got a bit too, how do I put it? A bit too zen, a bit too Beatles in India for me at that point. I'm open to that stuff, but I liked when it was down to practical nuts and bolts as to how we handle the obstacle course of life and how to have a good mental sense of self. Please do follow that link. I will put it down. And if any of you were ever influenced by that book, let us know. This Much Is True at protonmail.com or the comment section below. He was a great guy. He passed away some years back at the pretty early age these days of 75. But I definitely remember the other one. There was a few. There was like another book he wrote called Pulling Your Own Strings. And I think that was almost like, it was really good because it was how to handle people. And his thinking was, people take you as seriously as you present yourself. And if you show as weak, to a point of being a doormat, excuse me, they will take advantage of that. It's not their fault. A lot of us make a subconscious decision when we meet someone as to whether we have to take them seriously or not. Or as his way was describing it as, don't be anybody's victim. And he gave loads of behavior as to how you could put someone in their place, not necessarily aggressively, but by being assertive. And these were good tools for people, especially as we look at the youth of today now. Of course, I'm not doing that old big generation thing, but, this whole snowflake thing, or I need a safe zone. Why? Because you can't handle life. That's life. Shit is going to happen. Stuff is going to come at you. People are going to get in your face. People are going to say things you don't agree with. Tough luck. Get on with it. Roll up your sleeves and get stuck in. Stop whinging and playing the victim. Very much that's what he was like. Next topic. What do you think the most important sense is? And I've thought about this a long time. So what do we have? We've got touch, taste, sight, hearing. If I'm leaving one out, let me know. A lot of people might say sight. And of course, those of us who are blessed with it, how is it possible? But people overcome anything, as you know, like Helen Keller, deaf, dumb and blind. Hearing, of course, the other one. But I thought about it, and I think it's touch. I think we all need a hug every so often. You need that hug. And it must be very difficult on people who are in a relationship where all the, you're going to get to a certain stage of your life. If you prolong with a marriage where the kind of mad, wrestle to the bed, Heathcliff, bodice ripping, whatever goes on. Of course, that's natural. But when children come into the equation, that's a whole new ball game, and it sure tires one out in that department. But there are nights when you're by the fire, or you come in after a hard day, and you get the hug. And even if you didn't get the hug off your partner, let's say you have children, the children run towards you, or the children wave goodbye at you. I used to, when I was a younger man and in the suited and booted brigade, when I'd pull up to the house and those two little girls used to fly out the door to me, and you just whirled them up in your arms. I think of that scene. I can't remember the movie now, but it's a classic one with James Stewart in it. The Christmas one. When he hugs the children at the end and he's looking up and he's thanking God and he's touching them and they're touching him, because touching is, I think, it's a recognition of your life, your humanity. You're worth touching, and it's other life force. It's reaching out to you. You're not alone. Someone wants to give you a hug. So I think touch is so important, not just in your intimate life, but just in life in general. When even if you give your friend a hug, or someone puts their arm around you, it might be you two on a drunken night out and you stagger in together, whatever it is. I hope I'm making some sense here. And remember, if you make contact with me, you will get my ding-a-ling, if you pardon the expression. But look, I want to kind of get away from that because it sounds so desperate, but I would like feedback. But I'm here. I told you 5 days ago, I'm here for 90 days. So I will be doing this, even if I might email myself. Who knows? So we've had the most influential book, and then we've had what is the most important sense to you. I just think, for me, having thought about it a long time, I think touch is number one. Let me talk about the late David Soul, who passed away in the last day or so. It's kind of it's timely for me, because I had just before Christmas there, I'd made a decision that I was going to try and watch, and I think it's 93 episodes, all 93 episodes of Starsky and Hutch. Now that might sound sad, but it was a different time. I think the series started out in 75 and culminated in 1980. But when it started out first, myself and my sister, we were only kids. We were 11 or 12. And when that big striped tomato, as it was called, the Torino, used to turn around and do that figure of eight or whatever it was in the middle of the road, screeching to a halt, and the baddies were going to get theirs. And Starsky was in his cardigan and Hutch in his lovely leather jacket, and it was a magical time, and the chemistry between those two was perfect. They were in their early 30s at the time, probably in and around 33 years of age, very much at their zenith physically, and the chemistry, as I said, was great between the two of them. Starsky, of course, the wise ex-New Yorker cop played by Paul Michael Glazier, and he had a rough time in real life as well when he lost his wife and child to AIDS-related. It was a complication through a blood transfusion. But they loved each other on screen, and they loved each other in life, because they remained lifelong best friends. And even long after Starsky and Hutch had ended, they would team up every so often for conventions and what have you. And even Huggy Bear, good old Huggy, hey man, what's going on? When did the new Cadillacs come in? Remember Huggy Bear? Antonio Fargas, I think was his name. But I want to just concentrate on David Soul for a moment, because he was the ultimate specimen. He was physically gifted by just being so beautiful. He was an angel. Perfect features, the blonde hair, beautiful smile. He played Hutch uniquely. I'm trying to think. He was the kind of thinking detective, wasn't he? He was thoughtful and he was caring. Caring is the word. If you look at him, he wasn't just this beautiful hunk who could, the camera, he was like Elvis. The camera could get him from any direction and he was going to be photogenic. And I do know, I don't want to, look, everyone has their personal life. I know that there were demons there as well. But he'd started life from a very good family. His father had been a pastor, I think. He was a religious man anyway. And Solberg, I think was the real name, Solberg, David Solberg. Of course, he put in David Soul for showbiz reasons. And the father had them over in Germany, in Berlin. I think they lived there after the war, where he was ministering. David's father was ministering to the people in the aftermath of war-torn Berlin. And I think they'd moved to Mexico as well, where David learned to play guitar. And a lot of the locals taught him local Mexican songs. So he started out his kind of life professionally as a musician. And of course there was the digression into the whole stardom thing via TV. But initially, I think the title he used was The Covered Man. And he was doing quite well after very hard times trying to make it in New York and hanging out with the likes of Andy Warhol, who he didn't have a lot of great things to say about, him and his posse and that kind of lifestyle, etc. Let's just put it this way. David at one point reached so low that he said, look, I did what I did to survive. So you can take out of that what you will, but I think I know what he was alluding to. But he got through that. He had the covered man, and he'd sing, and he had a beautiful voice. He did have a beautiful voice. In fact, there's one song I can cry over at times. I'll tell you about it in a moment. And he was getting a bit of notoriety and a bit of fame, and he was appearing on all these chat shows, high-profile ones, probably the Johnny Carsons. I'm trying to think of the other guy as well. He had Irish roots. It'll come to me probably. But you our American cousins listening in, you'd know all the big, chat shows of the day, the 70s, the 60s and 70s. Merv Griffin, I think, probably was in there. So look, he was beautiful. And after he unmasked himself, he decided to do that. Suddenly the singing career died on its ass. And the next time he shows up in any real significant way is playing the bad cop in Magnum Force, of course. Magnum Force with our friend Dirty Harry. What's his name? What's his real name? He used to be I'm getting old, guys. He used to be the mayor of Carmel, wasn't he? Mark, why can't I remember? It was just about, Rowdy Yates, wasn't that who used to play as well? Come on, why isn't it not coming to me? Anyway, you know who I'm talking about. And he's great, and he's still with us in his 90s, that guy. All right, I'm going to do it. I'm sorry, I have to Google it. Bear with, because that would drive me mad now. I know you're probably shouting at, but, Of course, Clint Eastwood. I had to get that. Clint Eastwood. And from there he auditioned along with Paul Michael Glaser into Starsky and Hutch, which took off like a rocket. You know, the rest is history. Hugely iconic of the 70s. The clothing, the car, that Gran Torino, which actually, as you know, a film was made later on starring Clint Eastwood called Gran Torino. The Ford Gran Torino. Apparently it was a beast to handle, according to Paul Michael Glaser. It was not easy to steer that car. And Americans out there, you probably do have the best cars in the world. We will grant you that. There's some of those gas guzzlers back in the day, the Buicks and the, oh man, what was the other one I'm trying to think about? The Oldsmobile, and I know I'm digressing here, but the one with the horse on the front of it, what's that called? You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, get in touch with us. Mustang. So, Corvette of the little red variety. He was in the middle of stardom then. He had a big house. He had it all, but he had his battles with, and his partners received a bit of domestic violence as a result. But there was a lot of drinking going on. Not so much drugs. Drink, I think, was the big vice. And then subsequently he made a lot of, by his own admittance, poor choices of movies. So his star kind of waned largely for the rest of his life. He'd show up every so often on stage and doing little one-man theatres or whatever. But it never was quite the same. Probably personally it got a lot better as life went on, and I think he was married 5 times, but eventually he did find someone to settle with. But handsome, thoughtful. I loved how he played Hutch. And as someone did a compilation of all the moments where he was playing Hutch, I was only looking at this recently, and it was, you could see him thinking, which is great acting when you can do that. And the reactions and the facial reactions. We can't go on forever. 80 is a good age to get to. But the joy he gave to me and my sister Sharon, we would go into floods of ecstasy and whooping and shouting every Saturday. I remember my dad kind of going, "Why, knock it off, guys, will you?" But we were excited. And of course, of that time, you will remember the posters. I can still see those posters in my head. The one with the cardigan, and they're standing together, and I think they're holding a flower each. There was one where they're you could just see through the front of the Gran Torino, and they're out on a call. I think one of them's on the radio, or probably Hutch, and Starsky's driving. I could see those posters. They were so of their time. You know, it's when you're able at some stage just to touch people, that word again, touch, you know, and he touched lives. He made it was exciting. I've been looking at some of these episodes recently. Now, they're hard. You know, some of them are pretty pants. But because of those two guys, I can watch it, and I can watch Huggy Bear and late old Captain Doby as well. He was brilliant. So look, I'm sorry if I ramble on, but I promised you that I'm going to show up every day. Will you do us a favour now and get in touch either through the comments or thismuchistrue at protonmail.com. I'm going to put links and what have you down below. Remember, you will get my ding-a-ling if you show up and talk to us about anything we've mentioned tonight or the subjects that have gone heretofore. Take care of yourself. May your God go with you. Take care, because I care.
Tonight, let's not go anywhere. Let's turn the latch on the door. And if the phone should ring, then let's just let it, the way we have before. And let's have a quiet night in together by the fireside. We can talk without anyone else around to hear. Let's have a quiet night home, the way we sometimes used to. Don't they say every night at a party soon wears thin? Let's have a quiet night in. Every night it seems the music plays, voices talk too loud. I seem to lose you in the crowd till it's time to go. So tonight, let's not see anyone. If the party's on, we're not free. I hardly see you now, more than a minute. So just this one's for me. Let's have a quiet night in, together by the fireside. We can dance in the candlelight just as well alone. It's time for a heart-to-heart before I'm left behind you. Don't they say every night at a party soon wears thin? Let's have a quiet night in. We can dance in the candlelight just as well alone. Let's have a quiet night home together just this time.